Hi, I'm a 22-year-old and I've had no contact with my mother for the past year. She recently reached out to ask for help. This all began last year after I graduated from college and was living at home, job hunting. My parents have been divorced for the past 10 years, sharing custody of me until I turned 18. I split my time between them. 6 years ago, my mother started dating Sean. After 4 years together, Sean and his daughter, Kayla, moved in with us, and a few months later they got married. I didn't have any issues with them. Our relationship was pretty normal. Since I spent half the month at my mother's place, I didn't interact with them much. Sean was nice enough, but over time I realized Kayla didn't like me. Kayla, my stepsister, is 2 years older and seemed convinced she was better than me. Whenever I tried to interact with her, she'd brush me off, so I stopped trying to be friends. Over the years, it became clear she didn't like me. She'd roll her eyes, make faces when I entered her room, whisper on the phone, and giggle while glancing at me. These petty mind games were frustrating, but I tried not to let them get to me. There was nobody in the house I could talk to about this. Sean adored Kayla and treated her like a princess, and my mother would just tell me to suck it up. I vented to my father, who occasionally offered to speak to my mother or Sean, but I told him not to. It wasn't worth it, and Kayla could easily deny everything, making me look petty and immature. I've always been closer to my dad. After starting college, I lived with my mother and stepdad for practical reasons. Their house was in the city, close to everything, while my dad moved to the suburbs for peace and quiet. During college, I'd stay at my mother's place and visit my dad occasionally. After graduating, I moved in with my mother permanently until I could find a job and save enough to afford rent. I wanted my own place, and since my mother didn't mind, I thought no one else would either. Everything was fine for a few weeks until Kayla announced she was pregnant. She had been with her boyfriend for 2 years, and they decided to keep the baby. They even planned to get married after the baby was born. Everyone in the family was thrilled, especially Shan. I congratulated her too. But 3 days after Kayla's announcement, my mother and Shan sat me down. They told me I had to move out. I was confused because the baby wouldn't arrive for another 9 months. I didn't see why they needed me to leave so soon. They explained they wanted to sort everything out before the baby came, and everyone got busy. I tried to negotiate, explaining that I just needed a couple of months. I was already looking for a place and planned to move out once I had saved enough money. But Shan got aggravated and said this wasn't up for negotiation. He and my mother had made their decision and I had to go. He said there wasn't enough room and they needed space for his real daughter and grandchild. He didn't care about my feelings and told me to suck it up and leave. I was shocked and hurt. It felt awful to hear that since I wasn't his biological daughter, he didn't care about me. My mother sat there quietly, letting him say these things to me. Feeling betrayed, I decided to leave anyway. I didn't have to think much about where to go next. I headed to my dad's place. He and I had always been closer, and he had supported me through everything, including paying for all my college expenses. My mother had only shared the cost of raising me until I turned 18. After that, my father covered everything. When I told my dad what happened, he was furious, but there was nothing we could do. He welcomed me to stay with him for as long as I needed, even after I got a job. I was really grateful for my dad's support, so I stayed with him for a couple of months. I worked hard, and as soon as I had enough money, I got my own apartment. My dad was there for me every step of the way, even helping me out financially after I moved out. However, for the last couple of months, I've been completely independent. I still keep in touch with my father, and we meet every weekend. Even though it's more than an hour's drive to his place in the suburbs, it's totally worth it. Neither my father nor I have had any contact with my mother, and nobody in our family has spoken to her since she kicked me out. I don't follow them on social media, so I had pretty much forgotten about them, especially since I've been so busy this past year. That was until a couple of days ago when my mom and Sean showed up at my apartment in really bad condition. Their clothes were in tatters, barely more than rags, and they looked like they hadn't showered or slept for days. When I saw them through the peephole, I decided not to open the door. It was a pitiful sight, and I knew they were there to ask for something. I spoke to them from inside and asked why they were there. They begged me to let them in, but I refused. They would have to tell me what they wanted from outside. My mother then told me they had been homeless for the past couple of weeks and needed my help. I was quite taken aback because, as far as I knew, my mother owned the house we used to live in. Her parents had bought it for her, and her name was on the deed. I couldn't figure out how she had lost it until she explained. While Kayla was pregnant, she manipulated her parents into transferring all their assets to her, including the house. Sean and my mother had done this because Kayla's boyfriend's wealthy family had doubts about her intentions, suspecting she was trying to baby-trap their son. To prove them wrong, she and her boyfriend devised a plan to show his parents that everything belonged to her, and she had no reason to trap him for money. It took a lot of convincing, but Kayla finally wore my mom down. She managed to get her to transfer ownership of the house to Core. My mom had told her several times that it wouldn't make a difference because we would all still be living together, but she went along with it anyway. A month ago, Kayla got married to her boyfriend. The wedding wasn't as grand as they had expected, which was a red flag. If her in-laws were so wealthy, why wasn't the wedding more extravagant? Kayla had said they would split the wedding expenses, but it seemed like only the money from Kayla and my mom was being used. The whole thing fit into a $75,000 budget, which didn't seem much given her in-laws' supposed wealth. When asked about it, Kayla claimed she wanted a small wedding, and since her in-laws were paying for post-wedding expenses, like the honeymoon, she felt it was appropriate. So they didn't question it. 2 weeks after the wedding, my mom and I came back home from a visit to a friend's place to find all our stuff packed away in boxes on the porch. We rang the doorbell, but no one answered for about 10 minutes. When my mom tried to unlock the door, she realized the lock had been changed. Eventually, Kayla and her boyfriend came to the door and told us they wanted the house to themselves for privacy as newlyweds. When my mom asked why they couldn't get their own place, considering Kayla had said her in-laws were rich, both of us were shocked by her response. Kayla admitted that her in-laws weren't wealthy. She had lied to manipulate us into transferring ownership of the house and other assets to her. With the plan successful, they no longer needed us around. Kayla could now quit her job to be a full-time stay-at-home mom, and her boyfriend could start his own business. We were furious when we found out about the deception. We tried to get them out of the house, but since the deed was now in Kayla's name, there was nothing we could do. All our assets had been legally transferred to her without us thinking about the consequences. They had no choice but to leave that day. They stayed in a hotel for a few days, but it wasn't something they could afford long-term. So they started looking for apartments, but the rent was way beyond their budget. My mom and Scene had spent a lot on their wedding and never prioritized saving money. This caused trouble because they had quit their jobs a few months ago to start their own business, which hadn't taken off yet. Their main sales were through social media, but it wasn't enough. Their financial situation was already shaky, and they couldn't afford not to care about saving. After leaving the hotel, they faced a tough choice: either buy food and keep their business afloat or pay the high rent. For the last couple of weeks, they'd been struggling and ended up spending their nights in a nearby park, which was known for homeless people. A couple of days ago, they saw me walking into my building and decided to ask for my help. After hearing them out, I felt really sorry for their situation, but I couldn't help them. I was just managing to pay my rent and didn't have extra money to spare. I could only offer them my sympathy. When I told them this, they started yelling at me from outside my door, calling me heartless. Eventually they left, but my mom said she never expected me to turn my back on her after all she had done for me. Now I feel super guilty. Am I the asshole for telling my mom and stepdad that I can't help them even though they're homeless? Edit. Many of you asked why my mom and Scene can't afford the rent. In my city, landlords usually require at least 3 months of rent in advance before signing a lease. My parents don't have that kind of money right now. They spoke to several landlords, but none were willing to negotiate. They could only afford 1 month's rent up front, which wasn't enough. Rent here is really expensive, so I understand why they're struggling. My mom and Scene have always been big spenders. Mom never had to worry about rent before because her parents bought her house. But now she can't rely on them as they passed away a few years ago. She isn't in touch with the rest of our family, making it awkward to ask for help. I don't know about Scene's family. Honestly, I'm not surprised by this situation. They let things get out of hand and didn't save for their future. Their business isn't doing well, yet they keep spending money. At one point, I found myself feeling hopeless. My mother had a homemade jewelry business. She made the jewelry while Scene handled the finances. It was a small operation, but now they don't even have a home and are running low on resources. They can't continue the business, and I'm their only hope. Update 1. It's been 9 days since my original post. Most of you advised against contacting my parents, saying they should face the consequences of their actions. I get that, but when I walked past the park and saw them sitting there, looking defeated, I just couldn't ignore it. I tried for a couple of days, but eventually broke down. 4 days ago, I approached them and invited them to my apartment to freshen up. My mother changed into my clothes, while Scene wore a unisex t-shirt I had and his own jeans. They were so grateful, but I was at a loss for words. They told me they couldn't carry the boxes Kayla had packed for them since she took their car, leaving their belongings on the porch of their old house. I told them to wait in my apartment while I made them a meal, as they had been surviving on canned food. Then I drove to our old house. Seeing the boxes still there infuriated me. I rang the doorbell, and when Kayla opened it, she scoffed. She asked if I was there to talk about our parents and her actions. I told her I wasn't there for that. I told her she was a disgusting person for tricking her way into taking everything our parents had worked for. She had no talents or skills, relying on manipulation. I hoped her child would one day do the same to her, as that would be real justice. Then I walked away with a couple of boxes while she cursed at me. I had put the boxes in my trunk. There were only a few, mostly clothes and other things that belonged to my parents. I drove back home and gave them fresh clothes and everything else that belonged to them. I made it clear that this was just a temporary measure. I didn't want them to make themselves at home here. Instead, I wanted them to go back to their old jobs that they had quit a couple of months ago and tell their employers they wanted their jobs back. As soon as they were back on their feet, I wanted them out of my apartment. I was also going to allow them to live with me for free. I told them that with the money they had, I wanted them to split the rent and other expenses with me for as long as they were living here. I could tell they wanted to protest, but I told them they could either agree to my terms or I would kick them out as well. Then they really wouldn't have anywhere to go. So they decided to shut up and agree to what I said. After my discussion with them, I called up my father immediately and told him everything. I really wanted somebody to validate my decision of taking them in because I was not sure of it myself. I was worried about a lot of things and needed to speak to him to calm down. After talking to him, he told me I had done the right thing. Maybe it was not right in the sense that they had screwed me over once a year ago, but now I was being the bigger person and helping them out. While I had survived because of my father, they had nobody else to count on. This was quite different for them, and it showed the strength of my morals and ethics that I helped them out even when they had turned their backs on me. After my dad told me I had done the right thing, I didn't feel worried about anything. He even offered to send me money to help me out, but he didn't want to speak to my mother or Shen because he personally did not like or trust them. It has been a couple of days, and my mom and Shen have gone back to their previous employers to ask for their jobs back. So far, they have not received work, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed because the sooner they get their jobs back, the quicker they are out of my hair. Update. 2 weeks ago, I had taken my mother in and allowed her and Shen to live in my apartment until they were back on their own feet. The good news is that they were able to get their jobs back. The bad news is that they still haven't saved enough money, so they need to work this month and next month. After they receive their salary, they will be moving out. Until then, we are going to be living together, but at least they have been very thankful. There has been a complete turnaround in their attitude towards me compared to last year. My mother, in particular, has been constantly thanking me for everything I'm doing for them. They are helping me with all the household chores, ensuring I don't have to lift a finger, even though I've told them not to. Every time I come home from work, the house is spotless and all the chores are done. I don't want to get used to this kind of treatment because once they leave, I'll have to go back to doing everything on my own. But they keep insisting that after everything I've done, this is a small way of repaying me. It's hard to hold the past against people when they are trying their best to make amends. While I haven't completely forgiven them, I'm trying to adapt. A couple of days ago, my mother and I had a conversation about this while I was working on my laptop. It was just the two of us since Xiao was napping in the other room. She told me she was really grateful to have me as her daughter. Despite not being a good mother to me, I was still being an exceptional daughter to her, and she had to thank me for turning out the way I had. I didn't know what to say. She had tears in her eyes, so I just hugged her and said nothing. That moment made me feel like I was doing the right thing. After my last update, several people said I was making a mistake and being a fool for them, losing respect for me. But honestly, I'm not the kind of person who can see people struggling and just walk away. I can't do it, no matter how hard I try. People might not agree with what I did, but I chose to be good anyway. Update 3. My mother recently moved out with Sha after they received their first salary. They started looking for new apartments, and luckily, I found one just a couple of blocks away. They signed the lease, and now they're sorted for at least the next 3 months. The last couple of weeks were good. I reconnected with my mother. She apologized for everything, and we decided to try therapy to fix our relationship. She's not getting any younger, and neither am I, and I don't want to lose the relationship I have with her, no matter how strained it is. I'm a generally forgiving person. I can't say I've forgiven her and put everything in the past, but I want to have the option to do that. We're going to look into therapists and start working on our relationship in a couple of weeks. I've also put them in touch with a lawyer to figure out a way to get everything back from Kayla, since they were obviously manipulated and coerced into giving up all their assets to her. If there's some way to prove it, they might get some things back. It's a long shot, but it's worth a try. Knowing that Kayla might get off scot-free makes me so mad. I don't want that for her at all. I want her to be punished for everything she's done. She is the true definition of pure evil. I don't know if speaking to a lawyer will work, but my mother is willing to give it a try. Now that they have moved out, I'm back to living on my own. I'm thinking about getting a roommate because it will be easier to split the household chores and rent. This past month has been pretty easy for me since I didn't have to do all the work on my own. I've put up an ad, so I'll wait and see what happens. For now, I'm on my own, and it's nice. I feel good knowing that my mother and Shay are doing better, mostly thanks to me. Without my help, they probably would have still been homeless without any hope for the future. I'm glad knowing that I had a part in securing their future, and as long as I have the satisfaction of knowing that,